Thank you so much for inviting us here today. It's a pleasure to see all the enthusiasm that we have here in Indiana County in regards to sustainability, and we're just excited to be a part of that. My name is Chloe Drew. I am a lifelong Indiana resident, and I am the founder and co-owner of Mother Earth Farm, and I'm joined today by my twin sister, Jennica.
Good afternoon, and thank you again for inviting us here today. I'm very excited to have moved back to my hometown community and be part of this movement of individuals here locally, trying to enact a positive change and growth here in Indiana.
All right, so I'm going to begin today just by giving a little bit of background about the ways that I've personally been involved in sustainability and agriculture in Indiana County, and not even related to our farm, Mother Earth Farm, and what I've done, leading up to where we are today. So in 2013, I had a 1-year-old daughter at home, and I was very passionate about local foods, to a point where I wanted to just tell everyone why it was so important that we would be eating local foods. And so I thought, how can I get involved? And at that time, I went to the Indiana County Farmers Market Board and said, I want to volunteer. What can I do for you? My goal was to help create a more thriving farmers market, and I did a number of things in my time volunteering with them. So I created a website for the farmers market. I created and managed their social media accounts. I sent out a weekly newsletter, and I started the Saturday Tents. And I'm going to give a little bit of background on my impetus for starting these things. So the website, the main focus that I thought for the website was to have a bio for each farmer and vendor that was at the farmer's market. As of that point, we didn't have a website, and so if you wanted to know your farmer, you would talk to them at the market. But I wanted, as a consumer, I felt that it was very important, and I was super interested in learning the stories behind our farmers and how long they'd been farming and their farming practices. Were they doing things that were helping our environment, or were they not? And I felt uncomfortable asking those questions at a farmer's market, and I thought if I felt uncomfortable, then other individuals did as well. So I wanted to create a way that customers could learn about our farmers, and then in turn, that would encourage them to come to the farmer's market. So you have this farmer's market, and people who tend to shop there, they know the importance of the fresh fruits and vegetables, and they want to come out and support that. But on top of that, we do have grocery stores, and they do have seasonal produce there. How are we going to get people to say, well, instead of going to a grocery store, I'm going to come to the farmer's market instead? And I thought by having a face and a name and stories of our vendors, then someone would say, not only can I get fresh fruits and vegetables, but I also am supporting people here locally in Indiana. And because of that, I'm going to make the choice to shop at the farmer's market. And then the Saturday market tents. So in 2014, after I started volunteering for a little while, we started having 4 tents at the Saturday markets. Those were the community tent, an artisan tent, a musician tent, and a children's tent. And the purpose of this, again, was to help create a thriving market. I wanted there to be a reason that families and community members went to the farmer's market every Saturday morning. I didn't want it just to be a place that they could find their produce, which they can, but I wanted it to be an experience. I wanted families to come because they knew there were children's activities so their kids could run around and play while learning really important environmental lessons, and they could shop at the farmer's market. I wanted there to be live music so it would be an enjoyable atmosphere. As I was volunteering for the market, I also then started Mother Earth Farm a couple years later. And so my role as a volunteer shifted a bit, and we had a new, lovely, amazing volunteer who's continued my legacy with the market and creating a very thriving atmosphere. And I then became a vendor myself, and I served on the board in various roles from president to vice president, and now currently I'm the secretary. Since 2013, when I got involved with the farmers market, our vendors at our Saturday market have doubled. And of those vendors, the new ones, over half of them are young farmers. And of that number, around half are female-owned, operated, or co-owned farms, including ourselves. And I think that is something very exciting that we in Indiana County are able to bring in these young farmers, these young female farmers, in a field that we are not represented as well, and we're able to support them. So we have farmers who are coming back and they're taking over their family farms because there's a market for them here. And then we have farmers who are moving to Indiana, a good friend of ours from Pittsburgh, to come and sell because we have the rural community life, but we also have an atmosphere that supports our farmers. And I think that's very exciting. I heard earlier, and these comments have been coming around from today's conference, a lot of people saying, how can we support our farmers? Our farmers may be being forced to go into factory farms or leaving the farms altogether. How can we support them? And I think that's what we're doing with the farmers market. And the most important thing beyond going to the farmers market and shopping is educating the consumer. And so I'm not just saying this is why a fruit and vegetable that's grown closer to home is better for you or better for our environment, but also educating them about their expectations. So this is what you should and can be eating this time of year in Pennsylvania. And if you can change your expectations as a consumer, then you'll be able to support those farmers without, expecting a lemon right now in Indiana. So maybe to try and answer some of those questions that were going around earlier, I think that's very important, and we're able to do that with the farmers market. So around the same time that I started volunteering with the farmers market, I also got involved with the Indiana Community Gardens. A year after volunteering with the gardens, I became their youth garden educator. A little bit of history there is I have an elementary K-6 degree from IUP, and I'm extremely passionate about working with children, and I was able to merge that passion with my passion of working in the soil. I couldn't imagine now, standing here today after volunteering and being the garden educator, of being in a classroom in a building. Working with children in the dirt and underneath the sun is the most amazing experience that I've had thus far. So I'm going to give a little information about my program. It's called Growing Green Thumbs, and it has changed throughout the years and is continuing to change, but basically I offer free sustainable gardening classes for youth and their families in Indiana County. And these classes, they focus on organic practices, but in a very user-friendly way for a backyard gardener. So when I teach the children in my classes, I'm not using the words sustainable and organic. They're young. They're 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. But I am teaching them to love a worm. And I'm teaching them to enjoy the soil. And I'm teaching them to not think that this dandelion that their parents have been spraying is a weed, but let's look and observe a pollinator that's landing on it. And by doing so, without using the big words like sustainable and organic, I'm teaching them to appreciate and love their natural world. And thus, they want to then share that with their families, with their friends, and with, their schoolmates. And I think that's very important. So not only do I offer those free programs, but I also work with local organizations. So I work with Girl Scouts here in Indiana and other surrounding cities. I work with Seeds of Faith, which is a private school. I work with public schools. I am hoping, that's my kind of big goal in the next couple of years, to be in the schools more. I have already brought some of my lessons into the classrooms, and I'm finding there to be a barrier with getting schools out to the garden. And so I'm looking to try to reach more children that way. But then we also had the YMCA day camp that Kay mentioned at the beginning of today, where every other week this summer, I provided lessons for 75, maybe on average, children that I would never have seen otherwise. And that was a really exciting partnership, and it was a way to get a lot of new children in the garden. Also with my garden classes, I think it's very important to stress that nowadays I have 3 children of my own, that we live in a very sterile environment. And our children are very structured in the school and after school activities. So I try to focus my garden classes. If you ever pop in, you'll probably see this and think it's a bit chaotic, but they're very unstructured. I allow unstructured, imaginative outdoor play. And I think that's very important to foster a love for the natural world. We have probably recently, many of you have heard about the 2019 climate strikes, and there are youth-led strikes all over the world, and I think that's amazing. And it's so awesome to see these children empowered to raise their voices and their opinions. But I want to say that they're not going to do that. They're not going to have these, wants to go out there and be outspoken by reading a book about climate change. That's not where it's coming from. It's coming from starting at a very young age, enjoying their natural world. And then because they love this natural world in their backyard, they're going to turn that into something that they're willing to speak up about in the future. This last slide is one of my favorites because it showcases our last class that we have almost every summer, and it's where the children who have been taking care, they planted the seeds and they were helping them grow throughout the summer. They then harvest that produce, they wash it. We gave them knives, real knives, safer real knives, and they prepare a meal and they sit down and they get to eat the fruits of their labor, which is something that many adults don't even have the opportunity to do. And it's amazing and heartwarming to hear these parents say to me, oh, my kid's a picky eater. They don't like any vegetables. They won't touch anything. And then we look over and they're picking raw Swiss chard and raw kale, and they're eating it in a salad and they're happy about it. And so not only are we encouraging them by nature, because if they grow it, they'll eat it. I've experienced it every single summer, but we're also encouraging them to become self-sufficient, to empower themselves. I grew this and I'm eating food, and I'm not naive to think that they're going to then grow all the food for their family's needs, but it gives them the will and the power to do so, or to do part of that and have a care when it comes to that. I'm going to turn it over to Jennica now. She's going to talk about Mother Earth Farm. And I just want to say that our farm, while we do grow produce for ourselves and a small, share of families, we are very focused on the community and the ways that we can give back and work with our community to create a healthier environment. On the other side, it's this button. Yeah.
Thank you, Chloe. So Chloe talked a lot about her involvement in the community, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about the farm. So she started the farm back in 2013. I moved back to Indiana after leaving Pennsylvania after graduating college and living in St. Petersburg, Florida for a number of years. I moved back in 2017. Not only to be closer to family, which was a huge impetus to move, but also because of the opportunity to join my sister in a sustainable organic farm in a community that was welcoming to young business owners and welcoming to the organic farming movement. So we are a very small scale farm. We actually currently are farming under an acre right now and using our space very wisely. We're small scale, but we are still providing to a number of families within the community. We over doubled our membership and community members who were part of our weekly shares this past year. We still sell at the farmers market and to some restaurants. But we focus on sustainability and organic growing practices. So our number one goal, is soil health. That is absolutely key to everything that we do, especially when it comes to growing vegetables and berries. So in our small space, this works in a couple of number of ways. First is companion planting. So here we see lettuce growing next to green onions. Companion planting helps enhance growth between the plants that you are planting together, and they also help protect for pests. You choose one plant that is a deterrent for a certain pest, and you plant that to another plant that may be susceptible to that pest. Pests are one of two of the hardest things for organic growers. They can easily decimate an entire crop overnight. And so this is one of the ways that we use sustainable practices. Another way, because we never ever spray pesticides, we have to use natural physical barriers like row cover to protect from our pests. Or go as far as hand picking those disgusting tomato hornworms and smashing them and keeping it going. But we're doing this because we want to make sure that the earth and the soil that we're working on is better off than when we started. So a lot of our inputs to help us remain sustainable, and something that can be implemented here in Western Pennsylvania on a number of farms, is using on-farm fertilization. So we have comfrey, which any single person here today can grow comfrey in your backyard and you won't be able to kill it. And it actually will take over everything, so be careful where you plant it. But it has very long tap roots, and because of that, it brings in a lot of beneficial nutrients and becomes a wonderful fertilizer tea. So we're growing rows and rows of comfrey on our farm to turn into fertilizer that we don't have to then go out and buy commercial fertilizers. especially because we use organic practices, we would be buying organic fertilizers, which tend to be more expensive in the first place. So this helps keep things sustainable on our farm, and also comfrey in of itself is a pollinator, so is a plant that has flowers that attracts pollinators. So it's a win-win. We also use, what do we have here? Oh yeah, chicken manure. So we just started raising chickens for sale for meat. So we're selling meat birds this year, and they produce manure. That's a great nitrogen input to our compost. We also add vegetable scraps and weed waste from our fields into our compost. And lastly, we're super fortunate to have an on-farm spring. So again, keeping up with the sustainability, we're not having to use city water to water our plants. But in addition to being able to use spring-fed water, there's algae on the spring. And that can be used as a weed barrier and moisture control for our soil. So similar to how individuals use seaweed, especially at my time in Florida, I use a lot of seaweed. Algae can do the same thing, and also has a lot of trace minerals in it that are very good for the environment and your plants. Two methods that we focus on a lot at the farm are no-till and lasagna gardening, which you may or may not be familiar. So no-till means we're not using a rototiller to turn over our fields at the end of every season for every plant, or going in with any heavy equipment to turn the fields over. Instead, we want to disrupt the soil as little as possible. There are a lot of microorganisms that live underneath the soil on the roots of these vegetables that you'd otherwise be tilling up. And we want to keep that not disrupted, because that is key and for beneficial soil health. The other thing is called lasagna gardening. So the second biggest hurdle for organic growers are weeds. And since we don't spray with any inorganic fertilizers, we don't use Roundup or anything like that, we have to combat weeds some way. So we use layering gardening, which is adding a compostable material as a weed barrier, and then essentially piling up different other materials like leaf mold and mulch and compost to create your bed. And then all of that eventually breaks down, and you just continue adding compost every year. So the biggest input that we have is going to be compost. And right now we're using some off-farm community inputs like horse manure from local horse farms, leaves from landscaping companies, and food scraps. So the EPA estimates that around 22% of all solid waste that goes into municipal or landfills or incinerators is food waste. And that food waste is one of the single largest thing that American households toss into the garbage. And food waste is compostable. All of that can be turned into usable soil that farmers or backyard gardeners can use in their fields instead of it going into a landfill. So right now, we are partnering with individuals within the community, whether they're members of our weekly vegetable shares or other individuals, to collect their food scraps. We take in their food scraps, we turn it into farmer's gold, which is compost, and we use that on our fields. We're probably partnering with about 10 to 20 families right now, and it's not nearly enough. You need a lot of compost, especially in the way that we're farming, where we're layering and essentially creating beds every season, because we're not adding inorganic fertilizers to amend the soil. So we need a lot of compost to do this. So what we're trying to do is partner with larger organizations within Indiana, because there's food waste everywhere, from restaurants to the university to the schools, to any business that has a large amount of food waste. We'd like to turn that into compost, and it's a win for everyone involved. So if you're a restaurant who partners with us, you can promote that you're going sustainable, you're going green, because instead of you sending your food waste to the garbage collection, you're helping out a local farm and reducing your impact. You're reducing the amount of food waste that's going into landfills, and all of that is a win for the planet. But that may sound daunting. How are two part-time farmers going to be able to do this? And I'm going to tell you that I did this in Florida. When I lived in Florida, I volunteered at a number of urban farms, and the soil was not great in the urban setting in St. Pete. So almost 100% of the soil that we grew in was from compost. And almost 100% of that compost was from food waste. So we were partnering with juicing companies, breweries, coffee shops, vegetarian restaurants, and collecting easily over 100 gallons of food a week, just with volunteers. And all of that was being turned into compost that we were then growing all of our vegetables in. So it absolutely can be done. I have experience in doing it. We just need to have the right partnerships and the right people within the community willing to take the small extra step that it may take to help compost on site.
All right, so we wanted to wrap it up by telling you ways that you can help us or help yourselves or just help the environment, which all kind of goes hand in hand. So one is buy locally grown food. The farmers market's running until the end of October, and even when it's over, contact the farmers that are there and see who's still growing and looking to sell. And along those lines, like I said before, all of you here now are more aware of, eating seasonally and locally. Share that with your neighbors and educate others. Number 2 is encourage nature-oriented education. So in your children's school districts, in their after-school activities, I know my daughter's Girl Scout troop, they are composting and, saving all their food waste and tracking that. So encourage that for our educators.
And start composting. So you can compost in your backyard. They make some really nifty units where it's not too stinky. You can just throw it in there and put it on your flowers in the spring. Or if that doesn't suit you, get in contact with us and partner with us. We will happily take your food scraps. And better yet, if you know an organization that has a large amount of food waste that wants to go green, have them get in contact with us so that we can figure out a partnership that works for all of us.
Also, I wanted to mention this. The Indiana County Farmers Market and the Indiana Community Garden are 100% volunteer-based, and we need help. The community garden for sure. And if you don't want to learn to garden yourself in your backyard, come and help us in exchange for produce, and it's an amazing experience. So look up both of those organizations as well.
And then just lastly, contact us. So as you've seen or heard just now, we have our hands in a lot of these different organizations within the community as far as the agricultural realm goes. And we'd be happy to get you connected to whomever that you want to work with. If you have questions on composting in your backyard, like, can I compost an avocado? Yeah, you can. Ask us. We can tell you those answers. And we're here. We have our website up there and our email if you guys want to contact us. And then we'll open it up if there's any questions.
Thank you so much. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, right there. Hi. Great work that you're doing. And on your composting and what you do with partnering with restaurants, how do you deal with the contamination with oils or meats in the compost, or do you have a way of handling that, or is it strictly vegetable?
So it depends. We have not actually yet in Indiana, we've not partnered with restaurants. But when I partnered with restaurants in Florida, it was strictly vegetarian. However, we compost meat and bones. All of that is compostable. If you get your pile hot enough, even things that are toxins, maybe you have a leaf in your compost that was in a yard that was sprayed. There's actually scientific or biological things happening within the compost pile that will take the bad toxins and essentially neutralize them. So if you're composting correctly, you can compost things like meat. I wouldn't suggest doing it in your backyard because you're most likely not going to have a pile large enough to actually break down those type of things. I would just stick to vegetable and fruit waste, but on a larger scale, you absolutely can, and we do it on our farm right now.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah.
What do you guys do at wintertime? When do you shut down?
Our farm?
Yeah.
So we have a greenhouse this year that Jennica built last year that we hope to utilize in growing from produce. It will likely just be for our family. As it's small and we're tired. But via composting, we will take compost scraps all winter long.
Hello. Hi, I have a couple questions. The first one's pretty simple. What do you do with citrus, and would you advise or advise against composting citrus? And also, do you have any examples of community compost for more urban settings where you might not have a backyard or a system at home, or do you mostly see that happening with individual farms gathering, food scraps from the communities around?
So on the citrus one, I know there is some information about saying don't put citrus in your compost, but when I just anecdotally worked on the farms in Florida, as you can imagine, there was a lot of citrus, and we never had any issues with growing anything ever. But it wasn't just oranges. We were composting a lot of other things. So really, when it comes down to it, diversity is key. So you want a pretty good ratio of mix of what you're putting into your compost. And the other question, so I don't know, locally, I don't know in an urban area what opportunities for composting are. I know in Florida, we were an urban area, and it was essentially bring your compost to our farm and we'll compost it for you. And especially if you were a large enough contributor, you could take some of the finished product with you. I don't know what's going on maybe in the urban areas around here. I know in Indiana, though, the community garden accepts compost, and obviously we accept compost. So, and at the end of the day, if there was a family who's like, hey, I'm going to give you compost every week, I'm sure we let them take a bucket home with them at the end of the season. So
there are some municipalities that do collect compost. So they'll give you like a recycling bin, they'll give you a compost bin. For example, they do this in San Antonio, it just started. They do it in State College.
My question, I was concentrating on composting. I wanted to know your thoughts on no-till agriculture. I myself don't know much about it. I have heard some farmers say that it's too expensive to get into. Did you start with that, or and what economic benefits are there from using that kind of agriculture?
So when I started, I have no background in farming. I know how to grow a garden, and I didn't start out as no-till. But as Jennica found out when she came up and joined me, the weeds were out of control, and she didn't know how anything was growing at the farm because it was just too much. So that's when I started looking into no-till, and I didn't look into it actually as no-till. I looked into it from a permaculture stance with lasagna gardening, which is you build up your soil with your weed barrier layer and things like that. Since then, we've done some research with no-till, and I was just listening to a podcast where someone said that on a 10-acre scale, someone is even doing no-till. Now, the weed barrier that we use is cardboard, and it's free. Yeah. So I'm not sure. I think the number one expense would be compost. Mm-hmm. And that is why we are trying to make our own we're not trying, we are making our own compost. We need more materials to make more compost. But from an expense level, definitely compost, because you're having to put that on every season. That's going to be where your money comes into play. And if you don't have horse farms or cow farms like we do in Indiana, which we're fortunate to have the manure access, like Jennica in Florida, they didn't have that. Then, using the community, the urban setting to create compost is kind of a really cost-friendly option.
So in my household, we recycle the plastic and the cardboard. And, for us, the waste, we're like, wow, it would be nice if we could, recycle that. And so hearing about this compost, I guess my question is, you mentioned that y'all come and pick it up. How will y'all like it stored, or, how do we handle the, so y'all can?
Yeah, so actually we don't come and pick it up. I live in Indiana Borough, and so we let individuals drop it off in whatever methods they have. We prefer and encourage plastic buckets, so 5-gallon, 2-gallon, 3-gallon buckets. The 5-gallon ones you can buy at Lowe's. That's how we bring our food scraps out, and we have some smaller buckets that we give to some families. So that's how we do it. So drop it off at my house, we take it to the farm, or if you live closer to the farm, just depends on where you live. And then we clean the bucket, we do all the dirty work. We're not expecting you to compost or know anything about composting, except that we don't want plastic, and we don't want anything that's not compostable. We'll take it, clean it, put it back, text you, say, hey, come pick your bucket up. So.
How are you incorporating the browns, like with the collection of leaves and so forth, with your composting?
So, like we said, we work with a local landscaper who, by the sounds of it, just dumps his leaves back on his property, and it's always out of the way. And so I contacted him and asked him just to drop them off. And he did 3 drop-offs last year that were mountains and mountains of leaves, and then I told him to stop. Because Jennica was in Asia and I have 3 children and I didn't want any more. So that's where we get them. And we were and still somewhat turn it by hand, but we also have a Kubota so that we use to incorporate the browns and greens together now that we're growing our piles some.
If that's the last of the questions, we'll be moving on to our reflection period right now. Thank you so much, Jennica and Chloe. We appreciate you reminding us the importance of investing in our soil and also in our children.